get it like on my answer.
But you gotta write it home, right?
Lauren's writing furiously.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's right. Scribble your last thoughts down. Thanks.
Why isn't it any brighter?
It has to warm up first.
Oh.
Oh, you need to move the screen.
Okay. All right, who wants to start us off? Ladies over here, you were having a very interesting discussion. Please share.
We were talking about cold occlusion.
Okay.
And Caesar and Animal Farm.
Okay.
All those ones, and we were just talking about like especially in cold equations and stuff, like the cost of Barton's own beliefs and everything, like within his relationship, and we were just talking about how like his responsibility was, he had to kill the girl to save all the people, but that his relationship became weakened with the state because his own beliefs didn't match up with what he had to do because of his duties.
So he had a conflict?
Yeah.
An internal conflict. Between what?
Between his own beliefs and his duty to the state.
We call those morals or ethics. And why do you think his relationship was weakened with the state as a result of that?
Can you make the letters a little bit bigger, please?
Good.
Thank you.
Why do you think his personal relationship or his relationship with the state was weakened?
Well, because he really didn't want to kill the girl, but it was like he had to. So his what could have been a closer relationship with the state before, it's becoming weakened because he really it goes against what he believes and what he wants to do.
What was that quote that you found at the end, or that you guys were talking about at the end, where after he puts her in the ship and shoots her off?
Oh yeah, how he walked away weak and weary and all that.
Do you have that exact quote written down? Will someone look that up? Ariel, will you look that up for us? And I don't know if I'm convinced that his relationship with the state was weakened. I felt like he personally was weakened. And that's where you want to go to the text and see if you can find some evidence to describe, because for example, Quan, we know that his relationship with the state was weakened. He talks about it all the time where he doesn't believe in the ideology, he doesn't believe in the propaganda, he's questioning it, and he begins to question himself. But I don't know.
Also, Barton also questions, right? So, I don't know, it could be.
But that's where your examples that you pull from the text, your direct quotes, need to be really kind of spot on with what your argument is to make sure that you're carrying that through. But what I like a lot about your guys' example is that you took it from not just describing his relationship and responsibility, but then talked about the effects, and either effects on himself or the effects on his relationship, but you took it that next step further. So you're actually giving commentary. Did you have a connection to history for that one?
We use Animal Farm.
Oh, for that one?
Yeah.
I found a quote.
Oh, you found a quote, okay?
It says, he turned away to walk in the pilot's chair with the slow steps of a man old and weary.
Okay. Slow steps of a man?
Yeah.
is that?
183.
So that, similar to Quan, right, it's his relationship is taking a physical toll, it's aging him. You guys remember how Quan repeatedly talks about, I'm 28 but I'm graying, I've got crow's feet around my eyes, okay?
Who?
Quan,
Quan.
from Novel Without a Name. Okay, historical example that we could connect to that. Somebody else who was experienced conflict from maintaining the relationship. In second, we talked about the in night. Can you guys give an example in there? Jordan?
I can't give you like a specific example, but like overall, like how we were talking, talking about how like the Holocaust victims had to do things that they didn't want to necessarily to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Like Barton had to eject the girl in order to survive. So like that's kind of like ties into each other. You want?
I was thinking, because I haven't read Night, my caveat, I haven't read Night, but in second we were talking about the Nazi soldiers who befriended, is this sounding right? There was Nazi soldiers who befriended some of the Jews and ended up having to be the ones that led them to their kind of execution. Okay, you guys have read it, I haven't, so help me out here. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, Lauren?
I wrote the Holocaust sufferers and the victims of World War II, they're aware of the destructive nature of the situation, but it's not like they can do anything to stop it.
Were you talking about the Jews or the Nazi soldiers?
The actual
Okay. Andrew, did you read Night?
No.
Ladies in the back, did you read Night?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me, I want to learn a little bit, because obviously the Jews suffered, right? We experienced like horrendous everything they suffered. But Barton, I would almost say they're more like Maryland, where they're victims of the state.
Yes.
They didn't choose their they didn't choose their relationship, but they were still held accountable to the structures of the state. What did the soldiers do though in Night? So we don't often.
They had a role. They had laws, or they were given instructions which they had to follow, whether it was what they believed in or not.
And do we get in the novel? Are there any people that question those rules? Do we get any of the soldiers who question?
I don't think so. They're all like mean.
See, they tried to tell me that there was some befriending that happened between some of the soldiers. No?
There's like sympathy, but like.
Okay. So I don't think we get the picture that Barton and Marilyn were friends, right? He was sympathetic and did something as a result of that. So that could be an interesting connection. But do you agree that the Jews in Maryland maybe more had a similar fate? Mm-hmm. Okay. So maybe they showed sympathy, but they couldn't challenge established state. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, cold equations. How about somebody who talked about Novel Without a Name or Caesar?
I talked about Caesar.
Okay.
Okay, the example is Bruce is talking about killing Caesar and how and what motivates him to do that.
Okay.
The quote is, "It must be by his death, and for my part, I know no personal cause to spurn him but for the general." And that's page 783, lines 10 through 13.
Do you know what act, scene?
Yeah, oh, sorry. Act 2, scene 1, first page of that.
Okay, and that's how we would document it, right? Act 2, scene 1, lines 10 to 13. It must be by his death, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what is Brutus's relationship to the state?
Bruce's in this quote, you see Brutus, he's going to kill Caesar, and as he's contemplating why, he shows that he would not actually want to kill Caesar, except that he has to for the good of the state.
Okay.
So that's kind of it, really.
And literally, what's his relationship in historically?
He's a senator.
He's a senator, okay? And Rome is called a republic at this point, right? And he then, so this quote speaks to his responsibility, that he feels that as a senator and as a citizen of Rome, that he has to kind of maintain and defend democracy. Any connections, explicit connections with history that you can think of, besides the fact that it was history?
Well, I don't know. Not really that comes to the top of my mind.
Anything? Yes, Tom.
So like, the prompt is analyze the individual's relationship and responsibility with the state. So what I'm seeing is that there's a huge connection between an individual, an individual's relationship and an individual's responsibility are directly proportional. So like an individual's relationship can be seen as like is characterized by strong emotions. And what is in a relationship? What is a relationship? Like in a relationship a kid has to his mom or dad, or a relationship like someone has to someone else. Like it's an emotional feeling, and this emotional feeling is characterized by nationalism. Feelings of nationalism. Nationalism is pretty much an ideology which states that different individuals and are separated by ethnically and culturally defined territories.
Right, and so Kwan would be a good example of kind of nationalistic, right, commitments.
And so the rise of fascist leaders during this time period is characterized by nationalism, because the individuals that displayed a strong sense of nationalism compared to the rest of society rose up and kind of became the dictators and the individuals with greater responsibility to the state because of their relationship, their strong feelings of nationalism and relationship to the state.
I think you have to be careful, because there are certain leaders, like Stalin originally, when you guys were talking about him in history, did you get the feeling, did the evidence point to the fact that he really wanted Russia to be strong as a country? Yeah. Then we have other leaders like these, the two men on the train, the crickets in the matchbox, who were high-ranking dignitaries within the Communist Party. Did they really want their country to be strong? We never get that feeling, because they despise the masses. They talk about how they would never want to give up any of their own personal privileges and comforts. So I don't think you can say that all people who rise to the top are necessarily extremely nationalistic.
But
it depends on their motivations.
The individuals that are seen historically, like the individuals that are represented in history, and the individuals that we actually see throughout history, are the ones who are. See, that's the difference between English and history, because in English you will see the individual's point of view, like what the individual
where you only
is
get
doing.
the big, the great white men.
Right, what the individual is doing at that moment and what he is thinking. But however, for the greater good, for what's going on in history, what the historical impact could be much greater and could represent the individual's actual main intentions.
What I want you to do then, I agree that that's a trend that you do see. Come up with an example, because we want concrete examples in this essay, right? So think about that for a second.
Oh, like Brutus and Rome, and how he views Rome as his. He respects the Republic, and he respects the Roman citizens, and he goes against Julius Caesar, who he believes will ruin.
You got that.
Right. So that could be one example.
Okay, so think internal thoughts for a second. I want to talk about Kwan real quick, because we haven't spent a lot of time with novels out of name. Yes?
I just have one question. Doesn't have to do with that. You were talking about Caesar and JFK.
Uh-huh.
Was there a Caesar quote? Because I never heard the quote. I have the John Kennedy thing and Caesar written down, but I don't have the quote.
Oh no, Caesar didn't say. in Julius Caesar, not Caesar himself spoke, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That's almost the difference between, like, Cassius would say, what can my country do for me? And Brutus would say, what can I do for my country? So they're kind of...
Oh, so it's between, like, John and Brutus.
I would say that they, out of the characters in Julius Caesar, they're most aligned.
Okay.
And that quote that Andrew gave us, it must be by his death and but for the general, where he's talking about the greater good. Because he's saying, that would be a perfect correlation, because Brutus is saying, I don't have any personal vendettas against Caesar. I think he's a nice guy, but because of what he might become, because of the potential of tyranny, we have to get rid of him. Okay, so Novel Without a Name. I'm going to go back there real quick. Who talked about not Lauren? Thank you.
On page 49, there's a quote that said, I've been afraid to face myself, staring the truth. I was a coward. 10 years of war had gone by, and I had known both glory and humiliation, lived through all of its sordid pains. And I thought that kind of showed his devotion to his country, and it shows his unhealthy relationship with the state.
Okay.
Because, like, him, like, going into war, like, how they kept saying in the book, like, to show, like, the loyalty to the state and everything, it made him have an unhealthy relationship with the state and, like, start to resent it.
And he was you guys know the term passive aggressive? Where he didn't desert, right? He didn't reject the communist propaganda and show that by deserting or turning on his own people, but he was very kind of passive aggressive in his approach. So he still went out and did what he was supposed to do. He just kind of moaned and complained about it. Was there a character in Animal Farm who was similar? Talk to that in a second.
I know what you're talking about. There was somebody like that. I can't remember what.
That was what? A character in Animal Farm who did something similar.
I remember Wally, like, what's her face? That one horse deserted. So.
Molly?
Yeah, Molly.
And we were talking about Molly was the one that wanted her pretty bows,
Yeah,
and
bows and stuff.
but
Yeah.
and you guys were talking about how you thought she and Quan were similar, but she deserted, right? She rejected the state and left. Quan didn't. But as far as holding on to privilege and that being a motivation, there are some other characters you could look at. Casca being one of them. He was, wanted to maintain his personal power. And even the men on the train, where they kept talking about it, they were pale and fat. They were pale because they were never outside working, and they were fat because they enjoyed privilege and luxury. So I know you guys want to make Molly and Quan into the same, but I think when you look at maybe some of their motivations were the same, but the actions were not. They were very different. In second, we were talking about Benjamin. Is Benjamin from Animal Farm? The mule? Where he vocally disagreed with it, but he kept working.
Yeah.
He and Quan maybe operate a little bit more similarly that way. And with Quan, with any of the characters in Novel Without a Name, what I think you have to be very careful about is figuring out who the state is that they're talking about. Is it communist? Is it the Communist Party, the ruling government, or is it literally the state, the country of Vietnam? Because those are two very different kind of motivations. Okay. What I'm going to do, those of you who have your name on the backboard, I am almost done with the sticky note stuff, so I'm going to have yours done by the end of school today.
Can we come back?
Yes, so come and get them. And then tomorrow, if you want to chat, either during lunch, we can talk about that, and then everybody else will have your stickies back tomorrow. Okay? Thank you. Jeremy, I missed you. What was it? Diary important?
Yes. I needed to switch my classes because I was signed up for a class that I already knew how to do. So I needed to switch it before.